You mentioned last night that the first micro school you were ever in, I think you said it was 5th and 6th graders. You said that you saw huge transformations in many of the kids. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I would love to. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So I was working for Prenda. I had, it was the very beginning. So this was January of 2019. So it was in one of the first 3 microschools, one of those microschools that I had visited, and the microschool guide was having her first child and needed a sub for maternity leave. So this all happened in a 6-week period of time, which is crazy, but it also, this experience is what put me on the path of like, microschools can change lives. Like there is the potential. They won't always. It all depends on, like, the efficacy of the adult in the room is what will determine that, period. Like you could have a microschool with an adult that doesn't operate in a way that is supportive of children in this way, and it won't change lives. Or might change them for the worse. So I'm not saying that that's, so it's really critical, the skill set of the adults in the room and their attitude toward the kids. But there are 4 kids I want to talk about. The first one, his name's Mo. He's now a sophomore. He was a 5th grader. I talk about him a lot. I got to the microschool and everybody was at or above grade level. Again, they were using Khan Academy, and they were using No Red Ink as their English tool. So everybody was on or above grade level in Khan Academy, except Mo was a 5th grader. So it's beginning of 2nd semester, 5th grade. He was at 30% of 3rd grade in math, and he thought he was dumb. And he was the kind of kid that is like both cool and kind all the time. He was a vegan, just very cool and very kind, which doesn't happen in 5th grade boys all the time. So I called his mom to find out, kind of like, because I didn't know if this was a cognitive issue and basically the 2 previous education environments he'd been in did not emphasize academics. So I said to him, Mo, this isn't about your brain. The adults in your life have not given you the tools to have this specific set of skills. We had that conversation. I don't know if those are the exact words, but that was the message. And he believed me for some reason. I have no idea why. Again, I think there was a trust that, like a pretty innate trust that showed up. He started taking his laptop home at night and on the weekends, and he did Khan Academy in his spare time. And every time he'd come in and be like, I got 2%, I got 1%, and by the time he was done with 5th grade, he was well into 4th grade math. So he covered a course in that semester. And then he transferred to a Montessori that was inside of an elementary school in Mesa. And I visited it halfway through the year, and somebody said, so-and-so is the go-to if you have a question about English. And I was like, who's the go-to if you have a question about math? And they said Mo. And he was then into 7th grade math as a 6th grader, but it like trajectory changing, because when you think you're dumb in something, it leaks into all of you and you're just dumb. And he got to see that he's not dumb, that it wasn't his fault. He took one of my favorite things is it's not your fault, it is your responsibility. That combination of like, it wasn't his fault. He took the responsibility and now he's doing great. There's a kid named Riley who I have a text from his mom from a couple months ago. He's a junior, and he was a 6th grader that worked on 8th grade level, socially really, really struggled. And in that text she sent me, she said, Riley will always be grateful for his time in the microschool because he learned how to be social. He learned how to have friends and be a friend and make friends. And that had not been a skill set that he had. And it was small enough that it allowed that. Another kid's name is Parker, and he ended up only being in the microschool for a year, but his mom was like, that time had a huge impact on, he ended up in a sort of high flying charter school, was successful, but that time impacted that for him. The one that I have the hardest time not crying about when I talk is a kid named Sean. When I started subbing, he was not in the class, and his mom called me, got my number, called me. Actually, his mom ended up being my daughter's guide in the bullying situation. So my daughter was bullying his two sisters, but this is before that. So this is their first introduction to microschools, because that happens a lot. Parents see a microschool and they're like, I could do that, even if they don't have an education background. So, so she called me and she told me about him, and she said she'd been homeschooling. He's a 6th grader. She's been homeschooling since 4th grade, and because the traditional system was crushing his soul, it was destroying him as a human being, because he has dyslexia and he's a 6th grader that reads between a 1st and 2nd grade level. So she said, what do you think? And I said, don't enroll him yet. We didn't have a K2 curriculum, so I had no idea if we could. I said, just bring him and we will see over time if that's going to work. So I talked to him kind of day one and about his reading and dyslexia, and I asked him for permission to have a conversation with the class. And he gave that permission. I recognize now that power structures, maybe he didn't have a place not to, but and we had this conversation where kind of like gave an analogy for his brain's abilities in certain ways and how that applied to these other guys. And the whole class of 5th and 6th grade boys just embraced him. And his first day, he got picked up at the end of the first week, and he got in the car and he said, Mom, they like me. That's trajectory changing. And then before he got there, when I very first got there, I decided that it seemed like they were stagnant in their daily goals. And so I said, okay, let's have a collective goal for math. And I said, how much math can you guys do in the next 6 weeks? I left them to answer that. They decided to double their math output as a group, independent of me. I didn't ask them to do that. So then they drew a chart, which they didn't use a ruler or anything. So 5th and 6th grade boys, 500 some squares, all different, it was awesome. Put it on the wall. And the thing that we associated with that was whenever anyone got a % in Khan Academy, each of them had chosen how we were going to celebrate them. So one of the kids in the class, whenever we said, he would go, I got a %, the whole class would go, dude, like, in unison. And another one's, it took me so long to learn it. It was his house. His mom wanted a microschool, but wasn't going to be able to teach it. So found somebody to teach it. So it was at his house. And his was, do like all of us would say that. And they would walk up and they would fill in a square and there was such a beautiful support in that. But the best part of it was Riley was a 6th grader doing 8th grade math, contributing to the goal. And Sean was a 6th grader doing 2nd grade math, contributing to the goal. And they were celebrated the same. Like if you can create an environment in that demographic where that much love happens, everything changes.